Hello everyone, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and are looking forward to going into the third year of the clown decade. Since we are all enjoying the time between Christmas and New Year, I thought I'd give you a little treat and go into a video from Novara Media, where man who can't understand anything and wrote the worst book I've ever read, Fully Automated Luxury Communism, Aaron Bastani decides to tell the whole world the common lie that Jesus was a socialist. He had a absolutely unbelievable gift of foresight, since he came up with ideas of economic theory that no one would discover until the 1800s. This is just your classic commies think that everything is Marxist, and try to explain away Alexander the Great's desire for the largest empire known to man, as it was purely an economic pursuit, not just because he wanted to outdo his father. But anyway, enough of actual history, I think we should get into this video. So, take it away, Aaron Bastani. Please tell me if Jesus was a socialist.
For Christians, the arrival of Jesus Christ changed the world.
I don't think it was just Christians it changed the world for. It changed the world for pretty much everyone. It was Christian sects that really pushed forward the abolition of slavery. We don't have slavery anymore because of Jesus, really.
For believers, he came to take away the sins of humanity, and even if you don't believe that, his historic influence is extraordinary.
Yeah, nothing wrong so far. This isn't your classic fedora-wearing atheist argument where they're just saying, oh, Jesus' teachings we came about anyway through secularism. At least Novara Media accept that Jesus, whether people believe him or not, was a truly influential figure throughout history.
And yet, despite all that, few people agree on what he actually taught.
Well, yeah, you've got plenty of different sects of Christianity. I, for one, am Catholic. I know a few Lutherans. I obviously know a lot of Anglicans. And my uncle is even a Mormon. But we all believe that Jesus Christ was the saviour of the world, and he was resurrected after 3 days after being put upon a cross. But even so, we still have broadly the same beliefs. It's just a lot of different sects would say the Catholic belief that the bread and wine turns into his body and blood is magic bullshit, which it isn't, cope and seethe Anglicans. But at the very least, we all agree with the basic teachings, and at the very least the Ten Commandments, along with the golden rule to love thy neighbour. But Aaron Bastani doesn't really care about any of that. Aaron Bastani just wants to push Marxism, so let's see where he goes with this.
Was Jesus a socialist or a capitalist?
A lot of people like to say Jesus was a communist or Jesus was a socialist.
Yeah, this segment goes on way longer than it needs to. And I do really hate the argument because economic theory really wasn't a thing back in the day. I mean, the Romans couldn't even work out inflation. So Jesus is going to be neither a capitalist or socialist. And either way, in all of his teachings and all of his parables, it's always very much on an individual level. It always revolves around families or individual men. Prodigal son, building your house on sand or stone, Good Samaritan, all of this, it's never about a system. It's always about what can you as an individual do to please God and get into the kingdom of heaven. It's never about what the perfect percentage of tax you should pay into to feed the poor under a centralised system. So basically you're falling at the first hurdle when you even get into this conversation. So I've undermined the whole video already, but obviously we're going to go through the rest of it.
So who was Jesus, and what did he teach? And was he a socialist who wanted revolution?
I mean, I absolutely love that line. It's like, you know, it's like going into a first year religious education lesson at school. And it's like, so, can anyone tell me who Jesus was and what he taught? And a lot of people say, oh, you know, Son of God, crucified. He taught people to be nice to one another, basically. But then imagine after that they're saying, right, do you think he was a socialist and he wanted Marxist revolution? They're just such completely different subjects that you have to be tone deaf to realise how stupid you sound. But this is Aaron Bastani.
Well, to answer that, we have to start by separating the man, Jesus of Nazareth, from the historical figure of Jesus Christ.
I don't know what he means by this, they're the same person. What he should really be saying is that we need to split Jesus's, let's say, human side from his God side, for lack of a better term. His human side being that of temptation, his righteous anger when he started flogging everyone in the temple because they turned it into a market. From his godly side, and I think the ultimate portrayal of that is when he said, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do," when he was literally being crucified by people that hated him. But somehow I don't think this is the angle that Bastani's going to go with.
We know that he was likely born around 4 BC, that he came from Nazareth in Galilee, and that some refer to him as the Messiah.
Again, this is just so weird to me. He wasn't really referred to generally as the Messiah. He was by a few shepherds, 3 wise men, and obviously Mary and Joseph. It wasn't until he was in his 30s, at the very least, that he started being referred to as the Messiah by quite a few people, especially the disciples. It's just weird that you're starting off at his birth and you don't mention that the shepherds saw an angel telling them to visit him. You didn't mention that the 3 wise men crossed the desert after studying the stars and following the star shining over the stable to go and see him, though I suppose you'd say that's part of the mythology, not the actual history. Even though you can argue that the Holy Bible is a historical text, although it is second or third hand historical text.
We almost certainly know there was an observant Jewish man called Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified by the occupying Roman Empire around AD 30. We also know the historical context within which all of that happened. Firstly, Jesus was born in a place subject to foreign occupation, with the Roman Empire ruling directly over the province of Judea from 6 BC, shortly before he was born.
Hence Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem to partake in the census. But the way he's framing this as well, I mean, to be fair, Rome was an occupying force, but the reason he's focusing on that so much and adding kind of occupying Roman force in there is because he's going to bring it up later and probably try and claim that Jesus will be a revolutionary against the Romans. Which, if that was the case, it didn't go very well because he let them execute him. And no one really fought back against the Romans. Or at least no Christians did. And then, later on in history, we had a Holy Roman Empire. And call ourselves Roman Catholic because Constantine reformed religion within the Roman Empire to be Catholic. So it wasn't revolutionary, at least going off historical precedent.
Secondly, this gave rise to immense political hostility, and over the following 140 years, the province would see multiple revolts. That included the Great Jewish Revolt, which took place 3 decades after Jesus had died and led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple.
I mean, can you get into whether Jesus is a socialist at this point? I mean, I get the historical context and I get it's important, but this is just expanded on the point that, yes, Romans were occupying, people were upset. You don't need to spend 2 minutes on that.
This all meant that Jesus grew up in a country littered with travelling dissidents preaching a heady mix of theology, ethics and, yes, politics.
Well, naturally, because the way the Romans assimilated people was basically they tried to suppress outside cultures and turn everyone Roman. So yeah, I'm not too surprised by this, so I wonder if they're going to say that Jesus was political, which is just a stupid thing to say.
Invariably, these took on demands for social justice.
How could it possibly have been that when the concept of social justice didn't even come about till the 1800s? This is the issue with only looking at history through a modern lens. It makes you come to conclusions that are just monumentally stupid because these concepts hadn't even have been thought up at that point. And because of that, the people at the time will have had different ends than social justice because it wasn't even a concept at the time. Unless you go about redefining everything, at which point it's pointless looking at history.
Around the time of Jesus' birth, a man named Judas of Galilee led resistance to a Roman census set to be imposed for tax purposes. Another was Simon of Perea, who was allegedly referred to as the Messiah.
Great, what does this have to do with Jesus? And another point I should make, quite a lot of people at the time were referred to as the Messiah.
What these figures had in common was a mix of political anger, religious rhetoric, and calls for social justice, alongside what we would now today call Jewish nationalism.
I absolutely love that line, saying, they were calling for social justice at the time. And they were also calling for now what we would call at this point in time in the modern day, Jewish nationalism. I absolutely love that, because for those that don't know, Aaron Bastani was a big player in Momentum, or Labour's radical left-wing revolutionary wing, and they are quite anti-Semitic. So because of that, he's like signalling, they were good, they were calling for social justice, something that wasn't a concept at the time, but is good to the Momentum lot today. But something that's bad, say Jewish nationalism, he's saying, it was a different concept back then, they didn't even have a concept for it, so it's just a complete bastardization of historical concepts.
The core teachings of the gospel and how Christ was received in his final years and the decades after he died need to be understood in that context.
The whole point of Christianity is universalism. The whole point of Jesus' teachings being universal and being parables and being self-contained stories is that absolutely anyone can take those stories and learn from them. The prodigal son could be any family from any time. The Good Samaritan is easily just a white canvas to paint any sort of two groups on, basically saying, don't be prejudiced to people. But for some reason, Aaron Bastani's saying, oh no, forget universalism, we have to look at this through a Marxist lens, while ignoring the Jewish nationalism. Wink.
So what did Jesus teach? First, let's look at the issue of wealth.
The classic one that's always misunderstood. Go on then, let's go.
The Bible indicates that Jesus himself was a tekton, a woodworker or builder, meaning a low-class citizen who was almost certainly illiterate.
So already he's asking, what did Jesus teach? And then goes straight into, oh, by the way, he was a carpenter. Which, by the way, carpenters in those days, it wasn't just building tables and chairs and furniture and stuff like that. Because vehicles like wagons and ships and things like that were made out of wood, they'd actually be brought along to essentially be engineers. Oh, and also, majority of people were illiterate at the time, so that doesn't really matter.
We know he preached for years in the Galilean countryside, a region looked down on by the metropolitan elite of his day. He was likely seen as a country boy.
That is so funny. This is what I mean by putting a modern lens into the past. I mean, the whole time he's saying, oh, by the way, we need context, right? Roman occupying force, Jewish revolts, some preachers out there called Messiah, who were social justice revolutionaries. And now it's metropolitan elites and country boys being looked down upon. Which, by the way, is literally what Aaron Bastani does. But that is an incredibly specific Anglo-spheric concept, the country boy versus the metropolitan elite. Because the Roman system works completely different to liberal democracy today, and therefore the class structure would have been completely different, and I don't think any, whatever the hell Aaron Bastani's calling metropolitan elite, would even give a crap about anyone in the country.
There's no surprise then that core to the ministry of Jesus was the issue of poverty, something he would have observed every day. In identifying solutions to poverty, Jesus appealed to Jewish scriptures which were clear on the subject.
God, this is going to be good. Notice how he's just going straight to the quote and not actually trying to put anything into context here. That's because Aaron Bastani only tries to put context around something if that something without context goes against his point, and then he'll take quotes and not get the context for that quote if the actual context of the quote undermines his position, and I bet that's what's going to happen.
In Exodus, for instance, charging interest on loans to the poor is forbidden.
Yeah, notice it says the poor, not people in poverty. I also like how he just quotes Exodus and doesn't actually say where Jesus is quoting this part of Exodus. And also, again, he's just taken out context because this quote is from Exodus 22, and there are 14 laws about property, about not stealing, and specifically there are means of production, which in those days will have been animals, so it's like, don't steal ox or sheep or and all that. And then if you go a bit further down, where the law is in social responsibility laws, and the actual full law says, if you lend money to one of my people among you who is poor, you must not act as a creditor to him, you are not to charge him interest. So, that's not even saying don't charge the poor interest, that's saying don't charge the poor of the Jews interest. So again, it just completely undermines his position. But I think mentioning that would be too close to Jewish nationalism, so he ignores it.
Remember this day when the strong hand of the Lord leads you out of bondage.
Again, he's put that in there as if they're related. That's Moses after he has freed his people from slavery in Egypt, which is not the same thing as people being stuck in poverty.
While in Deuteronomy, it is stated that creditors are forbidden to accost debtors at their homes.
At the end of every 7 years you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone among their own people, because the Lord's time for cancelling debts has been proclaimed. Again, this is what I mean. Aaron Bastani just completely takes out all context of these quotes, because doing that would be too close to Jewish nationalism for him. Because a lot of the Old Testament is about basically the Jews finding God and coming out of, from Exodus, slavery from the Egyptians. And then it's how to survive throughout the world. And these books are there to teach them basic laws of the land, but a lot of these laws are very much treat the Jews as one type of thing, treat everyone else in another way. To which Jesus came along and basically made the whole thing universal. But Aaron Bastani's not really making that point here. Aaron Bastani's trying to say that these quotes were always saying what Jesus was saying, that this is supposed to be universal and not just for the people of Israel. But again, we've still actually had absolutely nothing about Jesus' teachings here, just out of context Old Testament quotes.
Deuteronomy also states that hired servants should receive their wages on the same day they've earned them. a dream for many freelancers today.
I mean, we finally have a quote that I don't need to say, oh, the context changes it a bit, because this law literally says, do not oppress a hired hand who is poor and needy, whether he is a brother or foreigner residing in one of your towns. You are to pay his wages each day before sunset, because he is poor and depends on them. Otherwise he may cry out to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. So hey, 1 out of 3 ain't bad.
But that's before even mentioning the Jubilee, where at the end of a 50-year cycle, all lands are returned to their original owners, and all bond servants are released.
I mean, again, context. So, according to Leviticus, if one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value of the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one whom they sold it. They can go back to their own property, but if they do not acquire the means to repay, what is sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of the Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee and they can go back to their property. Which, if you ask me, is a bit of a perverse incentive. But alas, it is only once every 50 years, so the odds on that actually happening, where people don't make money for so many years that they can't get their property back, is actually quite unlikely. But there we go, it's not just, oh, people get their lands back. It is more so you only get your land back if you haven't gone out and actually done work to get the money to buy your land back. And again, that's only once every 50 years, so that means for, theoretically 49 years, you have to go and try and earn some money by, from the looks of these passages, some sort of servant or farmhand. I just want to say this chapter of Leviticus also says slavery is okay as long as they're not Israelites. So yeah, maybe the Bible is for socialism.
Replete throughout these teachings, which Jesus knew and would often appeal to, was a message of not only economic justice, but just as importantly, economic rights.
Yes, there was a lot of stuff about property rights which you completely skipped over.
Another theme throughout Jesus' teachings was sharing your wealth with those in need. In Deuteronomy, we're told to give liberally and be ungrudging when you do so. From this account, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake.
This is a real thing of Marxists or progressives will take your religion, hollow it out and wear it as a skin suit. Because again, there's no context here, but because I like to work my arse off between Christmas and New Year, I went and found the context. So this from the same area as cancelling debts. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land of the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbour this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for cancelling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will towards the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. So notice that line, there will always be poor people in the land. This completely, again, demolishes socialism. The whole point of socialism is that poverty and people being poor are completely abolished. Well, I'm afraid that's never going to happen because of one simple thing, acts of God, i.e. things outside of people's control. People can lose everything for a number of reasons. Natural disasters, hurricanes, fire, and even just really, really poor luck. And socialism's answer to that, which in this case is just trying to get Deuteronomy and bash it over Christians' heads, is ridiculous. All of this is achievable under capitalism anyway. Oh, and also the full context is, again, too Jewish nationalism-y for momentum.
Elsewhere it states, open your hands to the poor and needy neighbour in your land.
I like how he says elsewhere when it's about 2 or 3 verses before the other one he just stated.
In the book of Isaiah, we're even offered a pithy motto fit for the Instagram generation.
I mean, not only is that cringe, but I've still heard absolutely nothing from Jesus. This is all just laws that you're taking out of context from the Old Testament that were specifically for the Israelites for the benefit of the Israelites.
Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes cease to do evil. Learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow.
Well, that's hilarious, because this is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, I'm not reading the whole chapter out, but this whole part is about how Israel has forgotten God and lives in sin. Wash yourself and make yourself clean means clean yourself from all sin and follow the Lord. And given that Sodom and Gomorrah were places of pure hedonism with gay orgies and all that, I don't think this is the message you are intending to put across. I mean, literally, this whole chapter is about people are forgetting God and his teachings. And all that you're putting forward is meaningless sacrifices. You might even say that this whole chapter of Isaiah, which is the first chapter of Isaiah, is how God will judge you and you will be full of sin if you wear his religion as a skin suit. He is literally saying, stop giving me meaningless offerings of these calves, oxes, and lambs, and instead actually do good in the world. Which is really ironic that Aaron Bastani would put forward this passage, given that this is exactly what he is doing. He's being a meaningless missionary. In fact, he's being worse than that. He's being a covert Marxist missionary. He is putting forward these particular passages not so that people will become Christians or Jews or whatever. He is putting it forward to try and make the case for socialism, which is arguably much worse, so enjoy your ride to hell.
This wasn't abstract. Indeed, the economic issues that Jesus focused on are familiar to us 2,000 years later.
I love how basically none of these quotes were about economic issues. They were literally all about treating your in-group better than the out-group. These laws are literally okay with doing all of these things to the out-group, apart from, obviously, paying any worker of yours before sunset. But this is what happens when you take things out of context like this. You end up looking like an idiot.
When asked by his disciples how to pray and who to pray for, Jesus responds, "Forgive us our debts."
Oh my god, this is so funny. So, what specifically Bastani is referring to here is the Lord's Prayer. And it is true that in Matthew's version of the Bible, Matthew 6:19 through 13, in the full Lord's Prayer he does say, "And forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors." But you are talking directly to God. Hence it's called the Lord's Prayer. So in the context of this, what debts means is sins, as we have forgiven those who have sinned against us. And this is made a lot more clear in Luke 11, where in Luke's writing of the story, Jesus said, "Forgive us our sins, as we also forgive everyone who sins against us." Because the only thing that God provides us is the means to create wealth. He doesn't give us any wealth apart from our own bodies. And when we misuse our own bodies, or anything as an extension of our own bodies, we are in debt to the Lord as we have sinned. As anyone who wrongs us with their agency is in debt to us for sinning against us. And the idea is that we forgive them, and the Lord will forgive us. I.e., the debt is forgiven. It's not a purely economic term, you absolute dribbler.
The Greek word ophlamaita is closer to debts than trespasses, as the King James Bible translates it.
Yes, depending on the context, it either means debt or that which is owed. And again, it wasn't a purely economic word. It's just like that a century ago. It's like looking at some writing and saying, I don't know, oh, Mark was gay. And taking that from a modern context and thinking, oh, Mark's a homosexual, rather than what it will have meant at the time, which means Mark is happy. Again, the issue with only looking at things through a modern lens, and especially a Marxist lens, where everything has to do with economics. I mean, this is what happens when you just completely destroy your own spirituality. You can only think in purely material ways.
What is more, aphaimi means not only forgive, but also release. So, forgive us our trespasses can easily become release us from our debts.
I'd sound like a broken record at this point if I point out, yes, this doesn't mean in the material realm, but the man can't think outside of it, so what can I do?
That line comes from the Lord's Prayer, reputedly passed from John the Baptist to Jesus. Another notable thing about that prayer is that it speaks in a collective we, not an I.
Yes, it means we as Christians. And yes, thank you for completely hollowing out what probably is the most important prayer to any Christian, wearing it as a skin suit and saying, see, Jesus was a socialist.
It is a social and political vocalization which includes economic concerns.
He just got all of that because in the Lord's Prayer it says, as we forgive those who trespass against us, or who sin against us, or forgive of debt. Whichever way you want to take it. He took from that clearly the Lord's Prayer is showing that Christians have economic concerns. Kindly do one and actually do some basic religious education. I think even people who failed religion GCSEs would know that you're talking bollocks here. But unfortunately, that seems to be a GCSE that's less and less popular these days.
Here's the whole thing. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and release us from our debts as we release others from their debts.
Oh, Bastani, please just stop. This is pure copium. This is pure cringe.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Food and debt forgiveness sounds a bit like a first century Bernie Sanders.
If we have children who are hungry in America, if we have elderly people who can't afford their prescription drugs, you know what? That impacts you, that impacts me.
God, end me now. This is so stupid. This is what happens when you can literally only look at things in a material lens. Nothing about this prayer is material. It is entirely spiritual, and another issue with this is that this is a bit of an issue with the English language. We tend to have single words that mean about 10 different things depending on context. And give us today our daily bread doesn't literally mean please give me food, God. And this is so simple, even Anglicans like the Archbishop of Canterbury from 2009 can get this. And this is from a BBC article of all things. So give us today our daily bread. Rivers have been convinced spilt over this extract, meaning give us this day our daily bread, because of the word that is used in Greek, and it is a very, very strange one that you hardly find anywhere else. It probably means daily, it probably means the stuff we need to survive, but at least some people in the early church understood it to mean the bread we want for tomorrow, or even the bread of tomorrow. Give us today tomorrow's bread. And they thought this might mean give us now a taste of the bread we will eat in the kingdom of God. Give us a foretaste of what that great banquet and celebration where the universe is drawn together by Christ in the presence of God the Father. Because that's what heaven was thought of back in the day, and still probably should be today. It's not some place in the clouds where everything feels great. It was always thought of to be a great banquet, because food was a massively, especially feast food, was a massive thing back in the days of Jesus. Because it gave you such a massive variety of food, and food was always seen as the source of all life to keep on going. And in the case of the Lord's Prayer, like everything else in the Lord's Prayer and in everything else Jesus taught, they are entirely spiritual in meaning, Bastani. It doesn't mean feed the poor, though that is still a good idea. It is asking God, in terms of a Christian context, to give us today a taste of what it will be like in heaven. Hence the rest of the context of the prayer. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, etc., etc. It's the same context. That's why it comes straight after that line. And the forgiving debts bit, I mean, I'm not going through that again. It means sin, Aaron. It means sin.
Alongside economic rights, demands to share, and an attention to the evils of debt, Jesus repeatedly makes clear how he feels about the rich.
Aaron, the only source you've actually had directly from Jesus so far is the Lord's Prayer that you woefully misunderstood. And also, yes, no one thinks that sharing your wealth is necessarily a bad thing. That's why the biggest charity workers in the world are billionaires. And nowhere so far have you actually cited anything that says debt is evil. The best thing you've come up with is that you need to forgive debts once every 7 years. That is not the same thing as saying debts are evil.
Woe to you who are rich, he says in Luke, for you have already received your comfort.
So already, this isn't a rich, bad passage. The full passage, which is Luke 6, verses 24 to 26, say, But woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers treated the false prophets in the same way. And all Jesus is really saying here is, while you may be satisfied now, you should be woeful, because I mean, in a very modern and scientific way, you're getting your dopamine hit now, but later on you will be suffering. And in fact, it may even be worse, because your suffering is at the hindsight of your satisfaction. And it's also another issue with especially the King James translation of the Bible, because I think in Matthew, when he's doing the Beatitudes, which is right before these woes to the satisfied, in Matthew it is blessed are the poor in spirit, whereas in Luke it just says blessed are the poor. And this kind of implies that this would mean rich in spirit, and doesn't necessarily mean, as Aaron Bastani keeps trying to push, a materialistic view. Because Jesus really wasn't a materialist, and his teachings really didn't push for any kind of materialist wealth outside of people not being in poverty. You know, the rich man and Lazarus, you know, he walked past Lazarus every day who was in poverty, basically dying, at his front gate and he was ignored. And Jesus is saying ignoring that type of poverty is evil. But these beatitudes and woes of the satisfied, not the same thing, Aaron.
Similarly, in Matthew, he says, "So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen."
My God, what is his explanation for that one?
What is clear here is that riches aren't a gateway to spiritual redemption, quite the opposite.
Hang on, I don't understand what you mean by the first shall be last comment. Because again, this story is entirely spiritual. Jesus makes a comparison between the kingdom of heaven and a man in his vineyard. And essentially at 3 different hours throughout the day, he hires people idly standing in a town square to come and work at his vineyard. And they all agree, look, I'll work till midday for a penny. And at the 8th, 9th, 10th and 11th hour, he does the same. Work till midday, I'll give you a penny. And then he pays them from last to first. So people from the 11th hour, he pays a penny. And it keeps going to the 10th, 9th and 8th. And at the 8th hour, those people are a bit annoyed because they've worked an extra 3 hours but get the same pay. Which logically that does make sense. If you've worked more hours, you probably should get more pay. But again, this isn't a materialist story. This is a story about spirituality. And Jesus' point is that in the agreement with God, as long as you all make the same agreement with God and put in the work you will agree to with God, you will all receive the same reward. I.e., if you see yourself better off than someone else in whatever way, you shouldn't disregard your own kind acts to get ahead in life. I.e., saying the poor didn't work for something is not a good enough excuse to not give them some form of charity. But again, Bastani's an idiot and only sees things in purely material sense. And I think if he read that story, he'd call Jesus an idiot, but he didn't read the story.
Indeed, this is explicitly stated in one of the Bible's most memorable lines, again in Matthew, when Jesus says that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God.
Ah yes, the old classic line where people think this means rich people are evil. And this line comes straight after a young and actually materially rich for once young man goes to Jesus and basically asks, how can I get into the kingdom of heaven? Specifically saying, which commandment do I follow the most? Because some of them seem hard to follow at the same time. And in fact, this young man even claims that he has held all the commandments from his youth. And he asks, what lack I yet? And Jesus said unto him, if thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And then it goes into, the rich man will have a hard time getting into heaven. So again, Jesus isn't saying that this young man is a bad person for not giving away all his possessions and giving to the poor. What he is saying is that he is not perfect. And he is even saying that this is an impossibility, although everything is possible under God. What this really is a critique of, well, materialism, really. If you care about your possessions too much, it will cloud your connection to God. And he is even saying if you are basically not in poverty, but if you are poor and at the very least not materialist, you will have a sharper connection to God. It is completely different to saying all rich people are going to hell. And don't even try and give me this bollocks, Aaron. I know you're an atheist. Don't try and start using Jesus as a skin suit for your own gain. Jesus is saying you do this to follow him and get into the kingdom of heaven. You're saying it because you're incredibly materialist and you want everyone in the world to have an infinity swimming pool.
Then there's the Epistle of James, supposedly authored by James the Just, Jesus' brother, but more likely to be a composite of his views, created by a later editor. There we find some of the clearest messages on wealth in the entire Bible.
As if the camel and the eye of a needle weren't good enough. But what I also love is that this whole video is called Is Jesus a Socialist? And so far we've had only 3 direct quotes from Jesus and absolutely none of them support socialism.
Let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field.
Again, it's talking about spirituality. The lowly boasting in being raised up means spiritually. And it means that those who have everything, i.e. are rich, their spirituality will disappear like a flower in the field. Again, not saying they're going to hell. This is the good thing about being Catholic. We believe in a thing called purgatory. You can be a good, rich man, although your connection to God is clouded. So you go to purgatory until you get enough prayer points to go into the kingdom of heaven, putting it in a very, very untheological way. But really, I'm arguing with someone who's misunderstanding absolutely everything said in the Bible. So really, I sound like a monk compared to Aaron Bastani's blasphemy here.
Elsewhere it says, "Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted, and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted."
Well, this doesn't even need to be spiritual anymore. All this is saying is that all wealth is temporary. Honestly, I don't even think he knows what he's saying anymore.
Beyond a disdain for the 1%, Jesus is clear that life is about more than an excess of private property.
Yes, he says if you have an excess of private property and goods and luxuries and all that, you're going to find it hard to get into heaven. So therefore he wasn't a socialist. Because Jesus does spread the message that private property is good. But if you hoard it at the expense of others, then you are bad and going to ruin your connection with God. You, Aaron Bastani, because I have read your book, just want everyone to be rich. You do not care at all for any sort of spirituality. Please stop wearing my religion as a skin suit.
In the parable of the rich fool in Luke, he warns his disciples, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions."
Oh, for God's sake, this is another story that isn't saying being rich means bad. The whole point of the story is that a man gets a bountiful harvest, and instead of only taking what he needs and not even necessarily giving away the rest, but maybe even selling the rest at a reduced price. It's not actually mentioned, it just says he hoards it. He's basically told by God, okay, well, tonight if I take your life away, who then gets all of this stuff that you have hoarded for yourself? It's basically saying if you're greedy, not only will you have nothing to give to the rest of humanity, but because of that you also won't get into the kingdom of heaven. It literally says in the parable, the soul took itself easy, ate, drank and was merry, i.e. was a bit of a hedonist, and didn't do anything productive or meaningful. And then because of that, they couldn't get into the kingdom of heaven, and God saw that as a sin. That is not the same thing as don't be rich.
The early Christians took that to heart and lived it out in their actions. This is documented in the book of Acts, which describes how all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any had need.
Yes, and this is where Aaron Bastani is going to be an idiot and say, oh, we need entire societies like that. And the obvious reply to this is, well, Aaron, you can easily find 11 other people and live in a distributist community. These apostles also went around, knocked on people's doors in different towns and spread the word of Christ. You are not doing that, you are spreading around how the Tories are evil and hate you. That's a completely different message.
The early Christians did this to imitate their Messiah, but all things in common, doesn't that sound like...
I'm literally a communist.
No, because the end goal of this is to get as close to God as they humanly can on Earth. And not only that, literally all they had was the minimal amount of bread and meat that they needed, and that was it. They wouldn't grow and expand. And also, if anyone dissented, which I don't think they would, they weren't sent to gulags to be killed, and this was not forced upon any of them. They all came together and agreed this was the way to live.
It seems Jesus even had a message regarding free healthcare. When a sorcerer named Simon saw how the Holy Spirit was transmitted by the apostles through the laying on of hands, he offered them money, saying, "Give me also this power, so that anyone on whom I lay my hands may receive the Holy Spirit." To this the disciple Peter replied, "May your silver perish with you, because you thought you could obtain God's gift with money."
Oh my god, this is just embarrassing. This story is not saying that Jesus was for the NHS. This story is saying that through God you can perform miracles, and you cannot simply purchase these miracles. I mean, through this, Aaron Bastani is basically saying that the NHS is the gift of God. This is your mind on pure materialism. It is again just pushing the same story that Aaron Bastani seems to be missing this whole time, in that it is very difficult to make a good and sharp connection with God if you have excess wealth surrounding you. To put it in a sentence, all that is said so far is that money can't buy happiness.
This follows the teaching of Jesus, who says in Matthew, "As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment."
Yes, but again, you have to be in the position to do that in the first place. But again, context is missing. This is the mission for the 12. Again, this isn't communism. The mission of the 12 is to go around other people's houses and spread the word of the Lord. And if we continue the teaching, it says, take no gold or silver or copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the labourers deserve their food. Whatever town or village you enter, find out who in it is worthy, and stay there until you leave. As you enter the house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Truly I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than it will be for that town. Yeah, that doesn't sound like communism to me at all, Bastani. And that is not even going for free healthcare. These apostles were miracle workers. That's why they're saints. And literally what Jesus is saying here is rely on the charity of others. Rely on people's goodwill and they will be worthy of you. He's basically saying, go around and do what I have done and rely on other people's charity to survive, because that is basically what they're doing. And that will show you who is worthy, and then they will hopefully follow you or spread the word around as well. This isn't, as Bastani says, about free healthcare, and he's an idiot for thinking it is.
Indeed, across the whole of the Gospels, there are 41 stories of physical or mental healing. Jesus heals the blind, cures the withered hand, and stops bleeding. His ministry, alongside helping those who endure poverty and debt, is combating ill health.
Yeah, again, Bastani, people aren't miracle workers. Jesus isn't saying that because he could heal people who were blind for free, doctors should do it too.
At the time, this was a big deal, since people would make religious offerings in exchange to be healed, something which poorer people obviously couldn't do. Jesus' message, by contrast, was simple. Access to health shouldn't be decided by the ability to pay, and at the very least, withholding it on such a basis is immoral.
Yes, Aaron, absolutely every country in the West agrees with that and has a health system that is very good at providing healthcare to those that might not be able to afford it. The NHS is one of the only ones in the world that does it centrally and doesn't have a private market health insurance system. And it also happens to be one of the worst ones in the West. This isn't Jesus for centralised, nationalised healthcare. But you are correct that Jesus says you shouldn't withhold healthcare from someone just because they can't pay. Hence we found a solution to that in the West, in Christian countries.
Then there is the manner in which Jesus died. Jesus was crucified, a punishment regularly reserved for rebels and insurrectionaries. What is more, he is found guilty by Pontius Pilate for not denying that he refers to himself as King of the Jews, something perceived as a direct threat to Roman imperial authority.
Well, that is one huge misreading of Pontius Pilate right there. Pontius Pilate offered the choice to a crowd. Should Jesus be crucified for being a blasphemous Jew, or should Barabbas be crucified for being an actual thief? The crowd naturally chose Jesus, and most importantly of all, Pontius Pilate washed his hands of the judgment. You might even say that Jesus died because of democracy there. Because really, if you're worried about Jews rebelling, and they're saying, please kill this man, saying he is king of the Jews because it is blasphemous, do you really think, Bastani, do you really think Pontius Pilate saw Jesus as a threat to the Roman Empire? Given that the rebellious demographic, the Jews, wanted him dead? You really are a spanner.
While we can debate whether Jesus was a revolutionary socialist, what we know for certain is that he wasn't a conservative. Indeed, the nature of his mission, in word and deed, was the opposite of conservatism.
Ah yes, the old classic, Jesus' teachings are whatever I say Jesus' teachings are. You know, Jesus was actually a very modernist materialist. He thought God should give everyone bread every day instead of having to work for it. You don't even believe in him, Bastani? Stop wearing him as a skin suit, for God's sake.
Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind outlines a number of core principles for the philosophy. One is that society needs orders and classes, another that economic levelling is undesirable and that social change must happen slowly, if at all.
Okay, well, I've not read the book, but honestly, with the way you've completely misinterpreted Jesus, I am going to assume you've misinterpreted that too.
Now, Jesus of Nazareth would not have agreed with any of that, and certainly didn't preach gradual change, but rather demanded his followers embody the world that they wanted to see.
Yes, and if you were listening, you would have also noticed that he said this is an impossibility. It's only possible through the eyes of God, and, with the last will be first. He also said at the end of that sentence, many will be called, but few will be chosen. And again, this is all for the end game of getting into the kingdom of heaven, pleasing God, doing what is moral from a Christian framework. The conservative mind accepts these parameters. It accepts that humans are imperfect. It accepts that while we are all made equally in the image of God, our talents are not equal. Hence, another parable you've not mentioned, the parable of the talents, in which God will be angry at you if you do not use your talents to go out to the world and come back with more talents. But still, I need to see what the rest of your argument is here, because I think it's terrible.
We see something similar repeatedly in the Gospel, and at no point does Jesus seek to uphold the existing order.
No, but he also doesn't say to destroy it.
This is conveyed in Luke when he says, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled." This, in the words of the Levellers, English revolutionaries in the 17th century, was a plea to turn the world upside down, not to be conserved.
Well, for a start, turn the world upside down doesn't mean have everyone with equal wealth. It means, well, I suppose it means what you want it to mean, Bastani, which is to have the rich be poor and the poor be rich instead. But again, you're completely ruining the Beatitudes here. Poor here, again, doesn't mean materially poor. It means poor in spirit, as is made clear in Matthew's Gospel on the Sermon on the Mount. What the Beatitudes mean is that if you are suffering in some way, say from poor spirituality, say from hunger, say you are in sorrow, say you are weak, and you recognise that and work on it, you will be blessed with, if you are poor in spirit, the kingdom of heaven. If you are hungry and you recognise it, you will be filled. If you are sad now, you'll recognise it and try and make yourself laugh. But unfortunately, you're doing what the Levellers did and taking biblical scripture and trying to put it into a political lens, which is the absolute last thing you should be doing with the Bible.
Now compare these teachings with the politicians today who mobilise faith in order to win.
Yes, conservatives are hypocrites, I get that, but at the very least, they act like they believe. You, Bastani, are doing the exact same thing, but not even pretending to do that, so I'm just going to skip this whole bit.
But how is it possible that people with such widely differing views both appeal to the same individual? Well, that's partly because, over time, Jesus and what would become Christianity was less about a zealot who wanted to reorder Jewish society in the 1st century AD, removing Roman oppression, and became something else.
You've not cited any of Jesus' teachings that say he wants to remove Roman oppression. In fact, he dined with Roman tax collectors, one of which actually became his apostle, to follow his teachings. This isn't the work of a revolutionary, that is what a reformer does. This isn't overthrowing the Romans, this is converting them, which eventually is exactly what happened under Constantine.
As his teachings were exported and distributed by Greek-speaking Jews and diaspora, they not only preached to other Jews, but also Gentiles. Consequently, teachings infused with a message of social justice and repeated calls to stand against tyranny and occupation increasingly emphasised celestial redemption, while grimly accepting the world as it is, something which certainly wasn't the case with the Jewish prophets that Jesus appealed to.
I love it. I bloody love it. Spreading the word of God is not spreading social justice. Social justice is a secular religion. It is not Christianity. Though ironically it is derived from Christianity. It is Christianity without God being central. And it is a silly way to look at the world. Jesus even puts forward that if we are all to be equal and follow the word of God, we would all be incredibly poor. And we should have absolutely no possessions whatsoever. This does not mean abolish private property, however. This means the only private property you should have is yourself, and with that you will have a sharp connection to God. But all this was during a time when they wanted to spread the word of the Lord. Since that is spread, it is now up to us to do charity work. And at the same time, we can accumulate wealth as long as it is not in excess, and we use it for useful and even charitable causes. Again, in a word, all it's saying is that money doesn't buy happiness.
This explains the tension within Christianity and how it has given rise to liberation theology, but has also been deployed by tyrants themselves. It's also how we're presented with teachings which for some people are supremely political, but for others, apparently apolitical.
Well, given you can't actually come up with anything in context that is inherently political from Jesus, yeah, it is just apolitical. It's entirely spiritual. That's the point. It is a spiritual text.
Was Jesus a socialist? Technically not, given the idea wasn't in circulation for around another 1800 years.
There's a book coming.
But he wanted to transform society, focusing on issues like debt, poverty, economic rights, and healthcare.
Oh my god, kill me now. You can't be serious, Bastani. The only thing that's true there is the one on poverty. Jesus himself is even supporting property rights. The stuff on healthcare as well, he's not saying make an NHS, he's saying if someone is ill, do what you can to help them, and expect nothing in return. Everything on debt you have completely misinterpreted because you think it's a materialist version of debt rather than a spiritual one about sin. And I don't even know where you're going with economic rights, but he obviously believes in property rights. And not even in a political sense, for God's sake.
Rather than that happen gradually, he called on his followers to embody the world they wanted to see in their own actions.
Yes, that's not socialism. And in fact, you are perfectly capable of doing that under capitalism. You're actually perfectly capable of doing that under any economic system, really. But socialism forces it upon you when you do not want it. Jesus did not do that. In fact, Jesus was very much the opposite in his mission to the 12 disciples. He said, if people cannot accept this way, just wipe your feet and move on.
What is more, he was by no measure a conservative.
Well, sure, he wasn't a neocon, but do you seriously think that he'd be a progressive in this day and age? Do you really think he'd be there saying freaking trans rights? Do you really think he'd be here saying, right, show me this socialism idea, and you show him every attempt made throughout history, throughout the world, even modern ones like in Venezuela? Do you think he'd look at those societies and go, yeah, that's what I was after? Get off it, you godless heathen.
While the right loves to talk about social issues as they look to the Old Testament, when it comes to economic policy, the place they look last is the teaching of the central figure in their faith.
Well, yes, Jesus did say to follow the 10 Commandments, and one of them is do not steal. That included people with excess wealth. He thinks you shouldn't just steal from people with excess wealth, but that is what you are after here, Bastani.
The reason? Because by the descriptions and definitions they themselves use, then yes, Jesus of Nazareth was a revolutionary socialist.
Literally, where is the revolutionary streak? Where does he say overthrow the Romans? He even says render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He wasn't for overthrowing the Roman Empire. The whole point is that wherever you find yourself, be good, no matter the system. The system of men does not matter, because in the end you're going to the kingdom of heaven. You will please God with your own good individual action. It is not what socialism is about. Anyway, I'd like to thank Aaron Bastani for wearing my own religion as his own skin suit to push his socialism. Naturally, all the atheists in the comments are lapping this up as if anything of use was said in this video, but it did give me a good springboard to actually talk about religion for once. And I do hope it gives you entertainment on the lazy day I'm sure you're going to have tomorrow on New Year's Eve. And with that, that's everything I had for you today. So, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. I hope to see you in the new year. Still watching my content. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. Don't know when the next Laughing at the Guardian will be. Probably not this week, but next. You can still find me on Tuesdays on Proper Horror Show's channel doing the horror podcast. And you can find me on Wednesdays on Regional Variations on Tailed Features channel. But I think that's everything I have to shill for now. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.